Hello and welcome to this special edition of the ILEETA Learning Lab. I'm Joe Willis, the Deputy Executive Director for ILEETA, and we're doing a special series of interviews leading up to the 2026 conference and Expo scheduled for March 16th through the 21st in St. Louis, Missouri. And what we're doing in these episodes is we're catching up with instructors who are going to be there talking about a wide variety of topics. And today I'm here with Geoff Desmoulin. He's going to talk to us about the science behind prone restraint deaths, an incredibly important topic. Doesn't matter what jurisdiction you're in, where you're working in law enforcement or corrections, it matters. So without any further ado, Jeffrey, kind of talk us through what we're going to get out of this session at the conference this year.
Okay, so we got an hour and 45 minutes. 90 minutes is going to be the presentation, so it leaves a lot of time for discussion. And the reason I like that is because often I'll get different perspectives from officers that have dealt with these types of incidents from the boots on the ground perspective. But I also like to hear the law enforcement administrators' perspective because they're the ones that have access to policy and can change policy. But then you've got the instructors, and that's really what ILEETA is all about. And having all those instructors in the room, they'll be able to discuss and challenge each other on their perspective and their philosophy when it comes to dealing with positional restraints or getting restraints on, and what that might mean from a physiology perspective. Because this topic really bumps up against a lot of areas. Policy, as I discussed, instruction at the academy, boots on the ground, like what are the actual decisions that are being made on the street, and then from a scientific and even medical perspective. I mean, there's a lot of areas to this. And this discussion is focused on the science because I'm a scientist, but I bump up against all four of those corners, and I kind of challenge them in a way to give them the tools that they need to make the decisions back at their agency specific to their agency. I'm so sorry, Joe, you're muted. Yeah, I know, of course.
Man, when the host mutes himself, how amateur, right? What is this, amateur hour here? You know, so we've got F-35s stationed not too far from here. And when they fly over, there's no way anyone's going to hear anything, all the goodness you're saying. So I mute myself only when that happens. And then inevitably, I got caught this time. So yeah, as you kind of look at how this hour and 45-minute session, where you've given plenty of time for conversation, which is so important at ILEETA, you're going to talk specifically about the science behind these, prone restraint deaths. What, in a nutshell, what causes prone restraint death? What are the causes of that?
Yeah, let me back up just a moment, because there is one thing that I believe is a real strength to this talk is its structure. And I try really hard to give people some context. So, I'm a scientist. I come from the scientific perspective. So there's going to be some physiology here. But that physiology quickly links to what I'm calling risk factors. And the risk factors that we go through in the course are risk factors that officers can identify someone at risk on the street level. So are they overweight? Are we on a hard surface or a soft surface? Are they, visibly, with the training that comes with being a law enforcement officer, is there a recognition of drugs being involved? Is there behavioral issues? Are they having a behavioral emergency? As far as mental illness is concerned. All of these things are things that most officers will be able to recognize. But then what I do is I link those risk factors to the physiology that we just covered. And then the last part of the course is to link those risk factors to body-worn camera footage during actual incidents. And that almost a half an hour is spent just going through body-worn camera and looking at what happened to that individual and the risk, and then linking it back to the risk factors that they can recognize in the street. And then, of course, we've built up why those risk factors are important with the physiology early on in the course. So I think that structure is some real value there, and real take-home value for the people that take this course.
I love it. So the risk factors, I think you said there are 8, and I know we've only got a couple of minutes here to talk in detail, but can you kind of run us through? You've already talked about the surface. You've talked about the body composition of the individual behaviors. You mentioned what are some of those behaviors. When we look at those 8 factors, can you give me kind of a quick rundown of what the 8 risks are? The 8 risk factors.
Sure. And and I should, with the caveat that we've identified 8. But right now I'm thinking, that there's no limit to this. Okay, we haven't uncovered. Here's the way we all need to start thinking about this. That's not what we've done. I think what we've done is just like, look, here's what science is saying about these particular risk factors and how they might be involved in these incidents. But it doesn't stop there. There may be more, and in fact, I do think there are more. And one, which is supported by Campbell. 2023, and we'll get into that paper in the course, but simply having hands behind the back, and I'm not going to spoil it for your audience, and most people would be like, oh no, really, is he going to talk about that? And that's a large part of some of the resistance we're bumping up against, but just stay with me, because there's solutions to all of this.
Yeah.
And we get to see what Chief James Gerace's take on these risk factors are, including hands behind the back. And you'll see what he actually does by training his officers and what those officers are doing actually on the street and what the outcomes are in those particular incidents. Now, is it proven? No. None of this is. And that's an important thing. It's science that can be linked to one thing, and that is the buildup of carbon dioxide. And that's a newer concept. It's not new, but it's a newer concept. And when we look at buildup of carbon dioxide, when you think of working muscles, for example, that's one of the risk factors. Is we have a struggle or a chase or both. We build up a lot of muscular activity. What does that do? Part of that process builds up carbon dioxide. We've got to somehow get it to the lungs so we can off-gas it. Otherwise, issues ensue. And one of those issues is that we build up H+ ions, which means we're lowering pH. And we're getting into the physiology now.
Yeah.
But that's as complex as it gets. If we build up CO2, we're decreasing pH. And it's that decrease in pH that is shown, again, through literature, to be linked to arrhythmias. And if we have arrhythmias, we start linking it to sudden cardiac arrest. And so when we talk about what is the cause, it's the metabolic acidosis cascade that leads to sudden cardiac arrest. Now, obviously, I've covered a lot of disciplines in there and have even talked about the risk factors, but they all lead to one funnel, and that is the inability of the body to off-gas CO2. And so this idea of asphyxiation is simply, I don't want to say it's wrong, it's just a different complication. What we're dealing with is how does this position and the different risk factors like weight on the back, immobilization, drugs on board, being overweight, how anxiety plays a role, all of these things that are largely outside the control of law enforcement, right? And so even if we understand the problem better, there's still a lot of room for legal defense, but I think legal defense is kind of the last resort. It's like, how far up the chain can we go to help things improve, not only for the people that we're trying to restrain, but also for just simply police safety and better practices. And there are ways to do that, and we'll go into what those are.
Yeah, so I was actually going to ask you in plain terms, because in the description, you've got hypercapnia and metabolic acidosis and that sort of stuff. And from a doctor's perspective and a research scientist's perspective,
Yeah.
clearly you can all day long with this stuff. But I think, when we look at hypercapnia and what it does, even for physical performance in ourselves, being able to off gas our own CO2 for the fight, for the run, for the stressful drive, whatever it is, we talk about like the physiological sigh for a parasympathetic reset, the double inhale, slow exhale for a long exhalation of CO2. It's so important. I think that being able to put that in clear terms and in ways that everyone understands, super important there. And tying it to the risk factors, I don't think we'll ever find a time that police officers will ever willingly accept not handcuffing behind the back, right? Like it is an officer safety 101 sort of thing. But I think having an understanding of what it does physiologically, as far as even to the chest position, the rolling the abdomen, diaphragm pressure, that kind of stuff. I mean, physiologically, those are some of the things I'm sure you'll talk about. And then you had mentioned surface for putting a person in a prone position on different surfaces. Kind of talk to us about that. What's the relevance there?
Well, it's funny. I'm not asking anyone to carry another gizmo. That's exactly the last thing I want.
Right? The belt is getting kind of full.
Yeah. And not only that is how complex can the training be? Like we need to understand how officers are operating, how much time they have to operate and to make decisions. And so the decision tree should be obvious and have a clear demarcation on what to do. And so all I'm suggesting is that if there is grass available or a softer surface, put them on there, because according to first principles physics, you'll do a lot for that person's respiration or ability to respirate if you can get them onto a softer surface. And that's it. It's just that simple. And so, and I've often seen this, and we'll see this in some of the body-worn camera that we cover, is they'll prone them out on asphalt and they're literally, the legs are sitting on grass and the upper body is on the asphalt, and so it's right there clear as day once you understand what that risk factor is and how it can do. And there's a little bit of information linking it to the physiology, so we get that understanding of why we're doing these things. But even then, I'm not saying do this, or I'm not saying this is the way. I'm saying here's a toolkit, go decide for yourself. Have that conversation with your EMS people, have that conversation with your medical director, regional medical director, and decide what's best for your agency. And that's all I can do. And if that's the message that's received, then I've achieved my goal.
And I can clearly see that happening at the ILEETA conference, because everybody walks into that room as a trainer trying to figure out how to improve training to the best of their ability with the resources they have available, and just increasing the vocabulary and the awareness of many of these things could lead to that. One of the things that we're seeing a big effort in is reducing the stovepiping of training, where we talk about in custody death and prone restraint over here, but over here we talk about handcuffing and takedowns. Though I think what you could potentially offer here in this conversation as it evolves with the trainers in the room is, how does it all tie together? What are the things in real life, as you watch these videos and you've had these conversations with Chief Gervais, what are you seeing as far as the reality on the ground, how we can integrate this into training?
Interesting. Well, okay, let me tell you the take-home message from science, and I'll tell you what I've seen that I think aligns with that on the street. So the take-home message from science is really this: no court, no expert is saying you can't put weight on the back, that you can't prone them out, that you can't do your job, essentially. No one's saying that yet. However, all the science points to, yes, do your job, but do it quickly, get them in those restraints, and then sit them up into a position in which we know respiration can occur more easily. And it's really that simple. Now, that's what the science is saying. Now, how does that relate to subjects on the street? Well, according to Chief Gervais, what he says and what he's implemented for his agency, what works for him, is same thing. Officers do their job. They get that person in restraints. However, if the person continues to struggle against those restraints, that could be a sign of a behavioral emergency. That could be somebody who's not quite thinking clearly. Obviously, they're still building up carbon dioxide because they're struggling now against themselves, not just the officers. And so that's their cue to say, EMS now is en route. And they don't just get EMS en route and we're gonna assess them on scene before we book them. It's like that's a full medical evaluation. So they get picked up, they get handcuffed to a spine board. If they're behaving, they get to sit up. If they're not behaving, then they get strapped to the spine board, but they get transported to the hospital for a full evaluation. And so that whole evaluation, the medical side of it, is triggered much earlier than what we see in any other body-worn camera example that I give anyways. And so it's just by that simple recognition and the trigger of EMS early can start a series of events that save lives.
Great. And, I'm curious about, so you talk about these recovery positions and that sort of thing. And when you watch the videos, because you're going to do body worn camera in the class, are all of them related to the position itself? Are they all relevant in some way to prone restraint or maybe a negative outcome regarded to prone restraint? Or are they also some general video where here's an observation in this one, there was no significant issue, but here's an observation we made? Is there anything like that?
Yeah. And I do that on purpose because I would have to say it has less to do with prone restraint and what the officers are doing than it does with the associated risk factors. And sometimes you'll see in some of the examples, the addition of what police are doing is kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, but it's not the primary issue. And there's other primary issues. And one of them can just be simply time. And that is one of the risk factors that we cover is looking at how time contributes to these things. And so anyways, there's some preconceived notions that we're going to be doing away with, some additional ideas that I think are fresh, and then some very simple changes that can be implemented as long as they're right for your agency. I'm not telling you to do it. If they're right for your agency, I think can make a big difference, and you'll see those examples.
Very good. And it sounds to me like this will be an actual conversation where people are encouraged to engage, much as what is expected at ILEETA, and that if I'm hearing you correctly, there's an opportunity that coming to this class, I'm walking out with something I can implement into my training. And it doesn't have to be another class that we add to in-service specifically about this. I can add it into my DT program and I can talk about the importance of offloading CO2 and that sort of thing in other contexts. Is that kind of what I'm picking up on here?
100%. Let me give you a very quick excerpt that was sent to me after I presented this at another conference. And it says, follow up for you. I've heard more than a few mention that your session was the most valuable for the reason that you gave very usable information that they can immediately put to work. So yes, that's the goal of this session. And I believe they will get that. It's not just, I'm not sitting on my ivory tower trying to impose something, that I think is really not my place. And I'll give you an example. I had this conversation with a local VPD officer, and I made the suggestion that Chief Gerace has made with his agency, and he said, "Oh, that would never work here." He said, "The reason is we're too big of a city. Our EMS is already falling behind. It's usually fire that gets there first. Maybe we implement this with fire." And I'm like, okay, great. This is perfect because we're having the conversation now, aren't we? We now understand, we're understanding the issue at a deeper level. We're having that conversation with the right people, and we can work out what's going to work best for them. And that's the purpose.
Perfect. Yeah. So I definitely see so many benefits of sitting through this session where it's going to be relevant, and I can go back and contextualize it, as you just explained there, for my municipality, my small agency, my tribe, whatever, where I have resources or I don't. And I think that's one of the, oftentimes people say, well, we can't do it here. And that's the end of the conversation.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's a pragmatic way. No. Let's explore this and see how we can. So as much as I want to continue this conversation, and I do, because I think there's so much here that we could start diving into. What are the myths that you're seeing versus what science is saying? You're going to cover that. And actually, if you got something for us real quick, what are some of the big myths, the things that are being put out that we can put to bed sooner than later?
Okay, well, I got one, and it frustrates me to no end. I've actually seen someone at a conference talking about prone restraint as an expert while he stands on his healthy, younger, non-drugged, non-overweight, non-anxiety, full of anxiety partner, while he explains that weight on the back is inconsequential. That misconception needs to go. It's not only dangerous, it's just wrong. It's bad information, because it just boils down to first principles physics as to why that makes breathing less efficient. And, talk to any rugby player, talk to any football player, they'll tell you exactly what it feels like when they've just finished an all-out sprint and there's now a dog pile. And anyways, and that's just a very layman's explanation, but that concept needs to go. And I know it's not popular, and I'll tell you this, Joe, I was openly ridiculed on social media by some of these people who shall remain nameless, but they no longer do that, and they've stopped pushing back. And to date, I know there's some targets out there, like Steinberg, Whedon are a few names you may have heard of that have taken a lot of flack for this type of talk. But we published our paper on this area in, I guess, June of last year, and have yet to receive anything negative. So the tides are turning, and it's best to be on the right side of history and just be open to the conversation. That's all I ask. I'm not saying this is the be all and end all, and I'm not saying that it's not going to continue to develop. It will, but we need to at least be open to the conversation in order to allow change to happen.
Right. So if I'm hearing you correctly from the beginning to end of this conversation, I'm going to fight with somebody. I've taken them to the ground, and for maximum control to affect this apprehension safely, I put weight on the back. Nothing wrong with that initially. But what we know to be true, as you were saying, first order physics and basic physiology tells me don't stay there. Get off it as quickly as possible and get this person into a position of recovery where good blood gas exchange is occurring and encouraged. Am I hearing that correctly?
100% correct. And it's awesome. Literally just that easy. We just give you a lot of information so it sticks, and that you can recognize these things on the street when you see it.
Perfect. This is going to be such a great session. I can't wait. I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of conversation about it. And so without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up here. I just want to thank you, Doc, once again for coming in here, having this conversation with me. It's definitely been a good one. And I think it's going to contribute to not just the conference, but overall. But for those who are getting ready to attend the ILEETA conference, this is a session definitely worth looking into. We will see you in March of just barely 8 weeks away now, 16th through the 21st. And a quick shout out, I'm wearing, if you're watching this on YouTube, our policetraining.net t-shirt. Good friends with policetraining.net. They've done so much for the profession, and it is the source, the place to go for the best training calendar for law enforcement. So thank you to policetraining.net. stick around real quick. Right after this, we will have a brief conversation about a couple other things, and we'll share those later on YouTube. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks for having me.